Welcome everyone to AURI Connects Fields of Innovation, part of AURI Connects monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. I'm Dan Scogan, the AURI Director of Government and Industry Relations, and your host for Fields of Innovation. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. Fields of Innovation is focused on bringing together Minnesota's regional ag and food value chains to build capacity and successfully commercialize new and emerging crops. Events will focus on highlighting promising new crops, examining market opportunities for emerging crops, and highlighting new technologies in existing crops. Remember that this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Before we meet our guests today, we welcome AURI Executive Director, Shannon Schlecht.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. It's exciting to be with everyone today as we kick off this new platform called Fields of Innovation. This is an exciting platform, I think, for us in terms of looking at new emerging crops, as Dan mentioned, as well as these specialty traits and existing crops, and just coming together as value chain partners to identify those constraints and those opportunities and how we can work collaboratively to move these new ideas forward, these new cropping opportunities, some new diversification for our producers as well as across the value chain. I think as we look at this from AURI's standpoint, it's challenging to bring new crops and new ideas to the marketplace. We've got a lot of steps in play from the breeder all the way to the consumer in terms of what they're looking for. How do you align those interests? How do you move things in parallel to speed that adoption into the marketplace and just introduce those products? So as we think about those different costs and those different nodes, platforms like this can really be helpful in terms of identifying those issues, working together to solve them, mitigating risks, and then really accelerating that adoption curve into the marketplace, because you do have producers that need to adopt these new crops. You've got processors and manufacturers that are looking to transform them into new ingredients or to incorporate them into their products. You've got supply chain issues in terms of handling and looking at those segregations that are needed and testing requirements to move these right through the right nodes there to get the product that's desired and wanted, as well as certified to move into the marketplace. And of course, you have the consumer demand standpoint as well, which I think we're all seeing consumer demand driving a lot of decisions into the agricultural marketplace, from transparency to sustainability as we look at different agricultural practices, and just that greater connection of food to the consumer and how it's produced. So I'm hoping that through these new crop introductions that we're looking at, that a platform like this can really help mitigate some of the risk, bring some diversity across to our agricultural industry, create some new niche products and opportunities with different ingredients that can come through these different platforms that are out there and that are being worked on to identify new crops and new opportunities, and how that fits into the needs of our producers and value chain providers across the value chain into the consumer demand place. So with webinars we'll be doing on a regular basis, in terms of having different topic areas to discuss, to get input, to answer questions, highlighting experts like we'll have today on what's happening with these different crops and what challenges are they facing, and how are they moving these opportunities forward to meet a new consumer demand. We also have a Facebook group that we've launched to collaboratively just interact with each other in between webinars, where if you do have questions or information you want to share, that the Facebook group is there for those interactions as well, and for you to connect with different partners in the value chain where you have ideas, things you want to explore, conversations you want to have. I think it's a great tool that we can utilize to help advance some of these ideas into the marketplace. I also want to appreciate the partnership that we've had with the University of Minnesota Forever Green Partnership Program, as well as the Stearns County Soil and Water Conservation District, where we've been working on Kernza, and which is the topic of the day. And we've got other collaborations underway with a lot of different crops, from camelina to industrial hemp to Ohio Lake soybeans. There's just a number of new opportunities and innovations that are being explored. So with that, I'm looking forward to today's kickoff conversation. I think it'll be an exciting one on Kernza and just what's going on in this space. And I look forward to your participation into an interactive event today. And congratulations to the team on kicking off this platform and launching Fields of Innovation.
Thank you, Shannon. Today, as Shannon mentioned, we'll be exploring market opportunities for the perennial grain Kernza. Joining us today are Tessa Peters, a crop stewardship manager for the Land Institute, and Christopher Abbott, a co-founder of the Sprowt Labs and Perennial Pantry. Now remember that you are and will remain muted during the presentation, but you can send your questions through the Q&A portal on your Zoom screen. We'll be working through those questions after the presentations are done. And with that, Tessa Peters and Christopher Abbott, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Thanks so much to AURI for having me. As they said, I'm Tessa Peters. I'm the Crop Stewardship Manager at the Land Institute. The Land Institute is an organization that works to reduce the loss of soil and promote a community life that's prosperous and enduring. And we do this through the production of perennial grain agriculture. And that's everything from breeding crops to trying to grow them in different agronomic systems, particularly perennial polycultures. And also working on disease and pest resistance for these crops. And we also do a lot of work on the ecosphere and human interactions with these crops and cropping systems. So I'm really excited to share some of our work with you. The reason that we think it's so important to work on perennial grain crops is that we need to reduce soil erosion in row crop agriculture. The graph on the left-hand side, you can see this is the loss of soil in the state of Iowa. So that's a place where obviously row crops are widely grown. And if you look at the photograph on the right-hand side, this is actually one of our growers and our researchers has Kernza field here on the right-hand side, and on the left, you see a field that had been tilled and is clearly suffering from a great amount of erosion. So we want to help prevent that soil loss, and we know that the way to do this is by controlling the duration and intensity of vegetative cover. So the picture here is a photograph of the Kunza Prairie in northeastern Kansas, and not only is the system diverse, but it also is has a huge amount of perennial grain or perennial cover. So it's never bare. Kernza is one of the crops that we work on at the Land Institute. We work on several, but Kernza Perennial Grain is the crop that is now starting to enter the marketplace here in the United States. And there is also a lot of research being done worldwide. So it's a worldwide effort. We have breeders in Canada, several breeding programs all over the United States, including one in Minnesota. And then we also are working with breeders and agronomists all over Europe, Central Asia, and I think for Kernza, that's kind of the scope. But it is being grown, it is being worked on worldwide. So Kernza is the perennial grain that comes from the Thinopyrum intermedium, which is intermediate wheatgrass. The name is a portmanteau of the words kernel, which is the seed of the cereal grass, and Kunza, which is the name of the Kaw people, and it's been used for to name several different places. One of those places, the Kansas State Research Station, is really important in terms of we have a collaboration with them, and it's also a place where the initial name came from. So what the Kernza Perennial Grain is a trademarked name. So this is the name that the Land Institute owns the trademark, and we manage kind of the entire supply chain through the management of the trademark. And the way that we do this is that we license at 4 different places in the supply chain. So seed producers, grain producers, handlers. So those are folks who are doing distribution, cleaning, dehulling, and then buyers. So folks who are doing milling, food companies, restaurants, brewers, those kinds of people. And we do this supply chain, or we do this trademark management and ensure that the supply chain is being stewarded through this trademark. The reason that we do this is because we want to ensure that this grain is not valued just for its ability to produce yield. At this point, it's really still in the pilot phase of commercialization, and we want to make sure that it's valued for things other than just, its ability to produce grain. We want to make sure that it's valued for ecosystem services like carbon cycling and sequestration. We know that having roots in the ground is the best possible way to draw carbon out of the atmosphere. We also know that Kernza can help improve water quality. It scavenges nitrogen really well and prevents detrimental runoff into water sources. The root mass that's in the soil, of course, also helps increase soil organic matter, which is really important in soil health. Because it's a perennial, once it's established, chemical inputs are generally less. Once it's well established, there's very few herbicides or pesticides that are usually needed. And of course, once it's well established, less tilling is used. We also want to make sure that it's a viable investment for growers. So we're in the process right now through a $10 million USDA NEFA grant that was received in partnership. The University of Minnesota is the main PI on that grant, which is principal investigator on the grant. Through that grant, we've received funding to establish a business association to ensure that growers have a voice in how the supply chain is stewarded. And there are also emerging growers cooperatives in Minnesota and other businesses that are emerging in places like Kansas and Montana that are helping to steward the supply chain and really value both the social and ecosystem services portions that are important for this grain. Finally, I want to say that, this is also something that we want to make sure is affordable for the average person. We don't want Kernza to remain in the niche market long term. We're hoping that it will move into the mainstream market as the pilot phase ends and full-scale commercialization begins. So the goal is to have improved management and best practices around management and improved breeding, which will increase the yields and make it available for all kinds of people to be able to support and eat. There's also a huge network and community that are working on all kinds of development of resources and sharing of knowledge across the supply chain. And so that's a really, really important part of why the trademark is important, because it helps us to build that network to ensure that we remain in the pre-competitive phase as long as possible, so that the knowledge that is gained by individuals can be shared in a way that helps to build the marketplace. And this is something that Christopher, I'm sure, will talk more about as he gives his presentation. And one place that you can go if you're interested to look at these resources is Kernza.org. There's a lot on there for folks in lots of different areas of the supply chain. So growers, handlers, makers, consumers, and researchers. And then I just want to talk a little bit. I'm going to try and finish up pretty quickly because I want to make sure that we have lots of time for questions. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about what the landscape has looked like. Over the last several years, the acreage has increased. We're at about just over 3,500 acres now, and we expect maybe over 5,000 next year. This is obviously, again, like in a very early stage of development, because if you look at something like hemp, which has kind of come on the market, there are more than 500,000 acres that have been planted even just in the last 5 years. So we expect that Kernza will get to that level and that kind of acreage, but it's really important that we steward the marketplace at the same time. So we actually are not trying to just ramp up acreage and supply. We really want to make sure that the marketplace and the partners in the marketplace are really understanding of this larger, the larger goals here of valuing ecosystem services and socioeconomic livelihoods for growers. So, and I also just wanted to show kind of where things are happening in the world of Kernza. Obviously, this graph is actually from last year, so we expect to see some changes in terms of some states moving up in acreage. The first production acres this year in North Dakota and in Idaho have been planted. So we'll also add a couple of new states to this map. And that is, I really just wanted to give a quick introduction. I'm excited to answer any kind of questions. And if you have other questions, please feel free to contact me at these emails.
Excellent, Tessa, thanks so much. And if you do have an immediate question, you can certainly put it in the Q&A portal on your Zoom screen, and we'll take a look at that. Also, Caitlin has been posting different links to various things, the kernza.org. We've also got a link up now for the AURI Fields of Innovation program. Also posting stuff about Matthew, who is our lead here. So we encourage you to take a look at those links and use those to contact us and participants in today's event. Caitlin, I'll just, or Tessa rather, I'm sorry, I'll ask you about the seed stock. As farmers become more interested in it, it certainly looks like things are growing for you, but are we in good shape as a nation with seed stock for Kernza?
Yeah, so the first commercial seed was available last year as a limited release from the University of Minnesota. And this year there's available seed stock of the University of Minnesota's new variety, Minnesota Clearwater, and also of the Land Institute's breeding population, which has been widely planted, called Cycle 5. And the first harvest of seed production of that was this year, and it was a really successful harvest, really good seed quality. So yeah, the seed supply is looking really good.
Question on nutrition as well. Is the nutritional makeup of Kernza much different than other grains?
Yeah, so we are still kind of understanding the nutritional makeup. We don't have just a spec sheet that is standard across the board, because we're still trying to understand what variation there is in terms of like field by field or lot by lot. But we do know that it has very high protein. The gluten in Kernza is weaker than in wheat, so it does perform differently in terms of baking. Yeah, but it performs like maybe somewhere between a soft white wheat and a rye in bread baking. But for any unleavened product, it's really great.
What are the main things holding back Kernza right now?
I think just really understanding and building the market. I would say that that's really the piece where we really need to just have a better understanding of what kind of market forces are out there and where the real interest is in pushing that market forward.
I want to ask you about moving out of that niche market and into the mainstream, but we have another question from a participant today. Can you tell us a little more about the carbon sequestration potential?
Yeah, well, we are in the middle of doing a lot of studies to really understand that. We definitely know that any perennial crop has the potential to sequester more carbon than any annual crop, because every time you till, of course, you release most of the carbon that you had sequestered. So keeping a perennial in the ground for numerous years has the potential to sequester more carbon than annual tillage. But we don't have the final numbers on those studies because, of course, it takes a really long time to understand that carbon pool, especially like what part of it is labile and what's stable. And so those studies are ongoing. Part of that work is going to be done through this USDA Kernza CAP grant that I mentioned before with the University of Minnesota. And we're also doing some of that research at different places in the nation and working with CSU's NREL to do some of that work as well.
Well, Tessa, you may have piqued someone's interest here because they want to know, how does a farmer sell the grain? Where is the market? Is it a contract, and who's buying it?
Yeah, so there are several different buyers. I know, AURI and University of Minnesota are really working on developing local supply chains for lots of like Minnesota growers and things like that. So there are some local efforts that are going on, and then there are also a lot of national. There's a lot of national interest. It's a little bit, of course, it's been a little bit difficult this year to gauge what is related to COVID and what is related to like a long-term interest. And so we're still trying to kind of flesh out and understand that a little bit better.
How many years before you need to replant?
We recommend about 4 years. So it's sort of still part of the mystery and the experiment is that we know that yields drop off pretty sharply. We've seen that in Minnesota, but in Kansas and other droughtier places, we don't see that same drop off after the first years. In fact, last year and this year as well, we had an 11 and 12-year-old stand that produced beautifully. So we don't quite understand the physiology of why that happens, but because of the drop-offs in yields, especially in the upper Midwest, there we recommend, maybe about 4 years.
This participant says, I might have missed the obvious, but how do you eat the grain?
Yeah, it can be eaten in any number of ways. Some of the first uses have been in beer, so as an adjunct to the mash. So, and Christopher can probably talk a little bit more about that and more knowledgeable about that piece than I am. But it's also been used in breads. So Birchwood Cafe in St. Paul makes a really amazing focaccia that they have served at the state fair. And then they also have some crackers and things like that on their menu. There are crackers available from a company called Columbia County Bread and Granola from Pennsylvania. So all kinds of different uses, similar to how you can use wheat.
A question about developing Kernza. What percentage of the cost of developing Kernza is or has been public money versus private investment?
I don't know the exact percentage, but certainly the Land Institute is almost entirely private, is a philanthropic organization. So all of the early work in terms of that came through the Land Institute was all private. There have been some SARE grants here and there, and the University of Minnesota and Minnesota Department of Ag and the state legislature have really worked together to provide some public funds for de-risking Kernza in Minnesota, which I think is a fantastic model, and we'd like to see that translated to other states. But yeah, primarily to this point, I would say it's been private. And with this $10 million grant, that may be shifting somewhat.
Has there been any research with Kernza being used as a cover crop or with intercropping?
Yeah, so well, as a cover crop, I guess in that sense, meaning that you would not harvest the grain. We actually don't recommend Kernza. If you're not going to harvest the grain, there's really no reason to plant a Kernza variety. You should go for just an intermediate wheatgrass that was developed for forage, or a native grass from your area. If you're interested in planting it intercropping, we're doing a lot of studies intercropping it with alfalfa so that we can get a benefit from the nitrogen availability that alfalfa may bring. And we're also doing some intercropping with some of the other crops that we work with, sandpoint and things like that.
Any conversations with Masonite straw board plant in Wahpeton, North Dakota?
No.
None that you're aware of anyway?
Not that I'm aware of, yeah.
Are you working with Co-op Network out of the Twin Cities?
No, we're not.
And does Kernza?
It's possible that my colleagues at the University of Minnesota are.
Okay, yeah. Does Kernza have allergens or gluten intolerances like a wheat product?
Yes, it does contain gluten.
Very similar?
The protein is higher, and I'm not sure what percentage of that protein is gluten, but certainly someone with celiacs would not want to eat Kernza.
Well, Tessa, we encourage you to, if you can, stay with us. There may be more questions for you as we get to the end of Christopher's presentation today, but very informative, and thanks for your time so far.
Great. Thanks so much.
With that, we're going to make the transition to our second guest today, Christopher Abbott. But as we do, I thought participants might be interested to know that AURI is currently part of efforts in central Minnesota to develop sustainable value chains for Kernza. Funding for this work has been provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. And the Trust Fund is a permanent fund constitutionally established by the citizens of Minnesota to assist in the protection, conservation, preservation, and enhancement of the state's air, water, land, fish, wildlife, and other natural resources. The project that AURI is involved with is being led by the Stearns County Soil and Water Conservation District, and we have partnered with farmers to plant 36 acres of Kernza in the wellhead protection areas. Other partners include the University of Minnesota and the Forever Green Initiative. Grains from these fields will be used to test and develop the new food and beverage products in collaboration with central Minnesota businesses. And Matthew is going to be our lead on this, and you can find his contact information in the chat portal this afternoon. With that, we transition to Christopher Abbott, one of the entrepreneurs that AURI has been able to collaborate with as part of our Kernza commercialization efforts. So Christopher, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much to AURI for hosting me today. Really excited to talk about our work on Kernza in Minnesota. I'm an entrepreneur. I live down in Northfield, and my business is based up in Burnsville. So we've been working on a variety of different businesses within the grain supply chain, and recently have been working to consolidate them all under an umbrella name of Perennial Foods. And at Perennial Foods, we're working to help bring these new crops like Kernza to market and bring about easy, delicious, and profound climate action. Today, I'm mostly going to be sharing pictures and stories of our experience building our business and the opportunities that we see around Kernza. So to sort of explain the three different areas that we work on as a business, I'll start out at a high level. So we have engaged in the sort of the processing innovation, the seed innovation, and also the market innovation within these new crops, and have focused on barley and the beer world first, and now have been working much more on Kernza. So Perennial Pantry is a new direct-to-consumer brand that we launched this summer that's selling Kernza flour and whole grain to folks both at a wholesale and a small retail scale. Sprowt Labs is our history. It's where we started back in 2015. And that's a hardware manufacturing company building grain processing equipment to be able to decrease risk and increase innovation at a small scale. And finally, Harlan Grains is a seed project that we started in 2016 to revive heritage varieties of small grains to increase biodiversity on the landscape. And now we're seeing a lot of opportunity with that for providing processing and raw material volumes as this perennial transition occurs to be able to supplement Kernza acreage. So today I'm going to be talking through these three different companies that we've been building. So to start, though, I think it's important to sort of a grasp of why we do what we do. And I think that comes down to this graph. And there's a fair bit going on here, but this is looking at the opportunity to sequester carbon at a large scale. And as a company and as a team, we're really, really concerned about climate change and believe in the need for urgent and drastic and scalable action on climate change, and that we're past the point of only needing to reduce emissions. We really need to be able to scale negative emissions. And this is data from the IPCC at the UN looking at how do we do that? How do we draw carbon down and put it somewhere other than the atmosphere? Horizontal axis is the potential of these different solutions to draw down carbon, and the vertical axis is the cost to do it. And so the bottom right-hand corner, soil carbon sequestration is really the cheapest, fastest, most scalable solution to draw carbon down. And as Tessa was talking about before, there's a lot of opportunity within perennial agriculture and perennial grains to be able to do that across a scaled landscape. And so that's really the fire burning at the center of all of our team members, and why we do what we do in engaging in these supply chains. So back in 2015, we jumped into entrepreneurship and were focused on the beer supply chain. I was sort of looking around and had been working on farms and in agriculture and felt like there was an amazing amount of innovation within local foods, but grain had not been a part of that conversation. Grains dominate our landscapes. They dominate our diets. They're something like 70% of global calories. And yet there hadn't really been an opportunity to eat local grains. And so we focused on beer. We felt like there were people liking craft beer, liking local ag, and that those two industries weren't talking to each other, and that the processing infrastructure in between them is the key to be able to increase consumption of local grains. And so we jumped into building malting equipment. We started in a basement down in South Minneapolis before moving down to Burnsville. And we spent several years figuring out how to build the grain processing equipment to connect farmers and brewers. And the image on the right is what we developed. It's an Acre personal malt house. So this is really small scale equipment to be able to help aspiring entrepreneurs or researchers or farmers to be able to take in barley or other grains and malt them into a usable product for a brewer. Malting's this week-long sprouting process that makes energy reserves and sugars accessible within grains so that brewers can use them. So this is a sort of all-in-one system to be able to do that. While we were doing that in 2016, we realized that a big part of the story of local grains, beyond being local, is can you have more flavor, more history, more unique products, so that brewers really do want to engage with them and work with them. So we started experimenting with growing out heritage varieties of small grains. Something like 90% of malting barley acreage in the US, which is around, I think, 3 million acres, is in 2 varieties, and they're wildly interrelated, and flavor has never been a part of the breeding trajectory of barleys. And there's something like 30,000 barley varieties in the USDA seed bank out in Idaho. So we started growing these grains out, getting 5-gram samples from the USDA and slowly building up seed stock over time. And this, served as a raw material to run through our equipment, to tell more interesting stories, to bring about some attention and get folks interested in what new flavors in beers they could find by working with local grains. And it was also really a strong introduction into even more, understanding of the complexity of grain supply chains. You can pick a tomato and then you can eat a tomato. And something like barley or wheat requires a lot of specialized equipment in the field for the farmer. It requires a whole specialized processing supply chain just to get to the door of a brewer or a baker, and then even more work before it gets to our tables. And so I think that in digging into understanding and growing out these unique varieties, it really increased our understanding as a team of all of the points of complexity and opportunities for innovation throughout the supply chain, from breeder all the way to the table. Here's a rice harvester combine that we have to be able to increase seed stock. That's also this year started being used in some other innovations. Some friends, I think, on the call at Main Street Project threshed some sunflowers with it for some seed projects they're working on. It's been used to harvest prairie seed and is an interesting tool. So this all led us to Kernza. We'd been selling equipment for a few years. We'd gotten our seed stock up to commercial quantities, and we were really realizing that we were too removed from the end consumer. We were providing tools for other people in a supply chain to create change in grains, tools for other people to make local beer interesting. But we really realized that being that many steps removed from the end consumer dramatically increased the challenge in being able to scale this and to really have the change and the impact on the landscape that we were aspiring towards. Kernza was something that we'd been aware of for several years as really a poster child and a leading opportunity within regenerative agriculture. And we really felt like it was sort of too big of a deal or too far removed for us to be able to work on it. And then we really realized that there's an amazing community of folks locally in Minnesota and elsewhere that we were able to tap into and really start working on and be able to start transitioning our business towards manufacturing processing equipment to being the processor ourselves. So last summer, we started working with Tessa and started expressing interest in being able to use our malting equipment to do Kernza malting research and figure out if we could get Kernza into breweries in larger volumes and provide more utility to them. And through that, we started working with the U of M, realized the opportunity to distribute Kernza, not process it yet, but at a small scale, make it more accessible for folks who wanted to trial this grain out in restaurants or bakeries. Here I am with Caleb Anderson in his Kernza field in Cannon Falls. And living down in Northfield, realized that there is a particular cluster of folks, of nonprofits, farmers and businesses all interested in this new crop. That led us to apply for and get a Kernza malting research grant, a crop research grant from the Minnesota Department of Ag, focused on assessing characteristics, quality, and flavor of Kernza malt. That's a 3-year research project we're actively engaged in right now. And we're focused on really trying to sort of crack the code of how do you malt this new grain and how do you clean it to be able to make it maltable. Malting provides utility. So right now a brewer can use Kernza as an adjunct in their beer. They're sort of hiding it. Maybe they'll get a little bit of flavor, but brewers really care about fermentable sugars, and Kernza unmalted does not provide that. Once you've malted it, it does have fermentable sugars, and suddenly brewers much more willing to be able to pay for it. So this is sort of one ongoing project that we're engaged in, using our malting equipment and seeing if we can help expand the market for Kernza over the coming years. So we were at the point of distributing some Kernza and starting in on this research. And then with COVID, really realized that selling capital equipment and selling wholesale to restaurants and breweries was a challenging place to be, and that it sort of accelerated our plans to become more of that food processor. So this spring and summer, we worked with the Land Institute and the Forever Green Initiative to be able to launch a crowdfunding campaign and a new brand, Perennial Pantry, to bring Kernza direct to consumer as flour and as whole grain, and to partner that with a citizen science research project for folks to be able to cook with this in their kitchens for the first time and provide feedback back to breeders on how they're using this new grain, how it performs, what they're making with it in their kitchens. And through that, over the summer, we then took what we've learned about manufacturing processing equipment and built out a small sort of pilot processing facility in Burnsville and brought in raw grain and started processing it through to end products. And so it's been really exciting to now get to the point where we've got a whole lot of grain in stock, a lot of flour in stock, and have been shipping constantly. Crowdfunding campaign went almost to all 50 states, and it's certainly been exciting now to continue tapping into that interest in Kernza all around the country of folks who have heard about this really inspiring story and opportunity to have something that is delicious and has a legitimate, meaningful impact on climate change and an ability to really make a tasty, climate positive food product. This summer, we also, and fall, competed in the Minnesota Cup, the largest startup competition in the state, and won the food and ag division, which has enabled us to now reinvest back into our business. We're entering into sort of a second phase of our processing facility where we're able to add a few additional pieces of equipment, increase our efficiency, and really set ourselves up to start entering into the regional marketplace and start getting our Kernza flour and grain and future products out to places where folks are more commonly purchasing their food. And now we're really at this point of trying to scale our business, expand our opportunity, serve as a market for Kernza growers, and really start testing that market that Tessa was talking about as sort of this big next challenge of being able to move Kernza up into substantially more acres and a larger impact on our water, on our soil, and on our rural communities. So a big part for that is telling the story of Kernza. You know, there's a base that knows of this grain already and is excited about it, knows it's delicious. I think the favorite quote that we've received so far after our crowdfunding campaign was someone calling Kernza the flower of the gods. And I think we're also used to flour being this sort of important but boring foundation that we can make tasty food or that we eat tasty food made from. And when you open a bag of our Kernza flour, it's really this cinnamony, sweet, nutty flavor that comes through the air and that you smell immediately. And it's an interesting crop and ingredient to work with. So we've been fortunate to receive lots of recipe submissions from folks who are using our product. We have a chef on staff who's been doing a lot of recipe development and has really been starting to figure out how to use this. You know, you can use it, as Tessa mentioned, as 100% of the ingredients in a non-yeasted, non-leavened product, and within yeasted breads, maybe more like a quarter, and really have some amazing flavors come through and an amazing story come through. So yeah, that's sort of our story of this business that we're building, and the future trajectory that we're looking towards to be able to continue partnering closely with folks like Tessa at the Land Institute and see what we can really bring to life with Kernza. Thanks so much for listening today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Christopher. And can we go down the pasta road with Kernza?
Yeah, certainly. That's one crop that, or one product that we're very interested in working on developing. And I think that there are some of your colleagues at AURI who are doing some interesting initial research up in North Dakota to pursue that. But I know that people have made it and enjoyed it.
Another comment that someone had tried it this week and they really caught that cinnamon scents when they opened the bag of flour. They could smell it. Tessa, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah,
pasta?
Dumpling and Strand has made pasta from it, and so we know that it's very good and works well.
We have a general question, and I'll throw it to either of you. What challenges do you run into with milling Kernza versus wheat?
Yeah, Kernza is tiny. I think that a lot of the cleaning and the processing and the milling, the challenges come to the size. I think that the most recent numbers I've seen are maybe a Kernza kernel weighs 1.6 milligrams and a corn kernel's maybe 220, 240 milligrams. So something like 200 times smaller than corn. So if you think about cleaning equipment, not from a bushels per hour or weight per hour measurement going through it, and instead by a kernels per hour, which really is what it is, you have to send so many more kernels through a processing machine to be able to hit those sorts of comparable numbers as larger scale processing equipment or other crops. And then similarly with milling, our millstones have to be remarkably close together to be able to mill Kernza down into a usable flour. And so I think that those are some of the challenges right now. And, I hadn't seen that picture before that Tessa had of the kernel size increase. And that's certainly a demonstration of how Kernza will be successful as long as a whole community continues working on it. It's not going to be one company or one entity that makes this a success. It's going to be a public-private partnership that really lifts this up for everyone.
Regarding milling, we have a listener that wants to know if the seed is milled whole or do you have to dehull it?
Currently, you have to dehull it. I think that some of the genetic varieties that we're buying in right now, it's maybe 20 or 30% of the grain free threshes in the combine. And then the rest of it, we all have to run through a dehuller before milling it.
What, if any, institutional and or regulatory barriers are in your way to accomplish more carbon sequestration? So I don't know if that's a Tessa question or a Christopher question, but.
Yeah, I think that I don't see barriers that come from a regulatory standpoint. I think that we are where we are today because of investment from the state in being able to really lay the foundation of boosting the supply chain. And I think that we're on a good path, and there's a snowball that is gaining momentum as all of these different partners really work to boost Kernza. And I think at this moment, it's really time to continue growing the market, telling the story, make many more people know what this thing is, and with that, scale it intentionally.
How about you, Tessa? Do you see regulatory barriers?
Not so much regulatory barriers as just what Christopher was saying, with increased investment and an increased number of people working on this, the challenges will be met more quickly. So it really comes down to scaling what's happening in Minnesota and adopting those models in other states, as well as increasing investment for the basic research that's being done. And that's how we'll get this thing and increase the amount of carbon that we're able to sequester.
I'm being reminded that AURI is doing some milling tests right now with NCI, Northern Crops Institute out of Fargo, working on improving the process and trying to identify some best practices. So you can be in contact with Matthew for updates on how that work is going. We do have some more questions from some of those participating today. Is there currently a malted Kernza that's ready for sale to brewers, or are we pretty much talking just flour and grain right now?
Just flour and grain right now. We're engaged in that research, and that's basically a steady year or constant year of malting that we're engaged in right now. And we'll know a whole lot more, in 3, 6, 12 months to be able to have the base information to start thinking about running larger production lots of it.
And Tess, I meant to ask this one when you wrapped up your presentation, but you talked about moving Kernza out of a niche market and into the general market. Are you seeing signs that that's happening, or how far away are we from saying that we've moved?
I think this pilot phase is bound to last at least another 5 years. And I think that that's good. Again, we're not interested in scaling production and having the price fall out on growers. We really want to make sure that we're scaling the market at the same time. So we hope to stay in the pilot phase for the next 8 years.
Are there any other new alternative crops that look promising? Somebody's thinking beyond Kernza today.
Yeah, a lot of them. The University of Minnesota Forever Green Initiative or Forever Green Partnership is working on a number of crops, pennycress and camelina, yep, and some others. At the Land Institute, we work on sainfoin as a food crop. We work on silphium, which is a native to the central Midwest, as an oilseed crop. And we also work on perennial wheat and perennial sorghum. So there are lots of crops that are looking really, really
promising.
Good.
Yeah, we just got a first sample of camelina in a few weeks ago through folks at the U of M. And the pitch that we've received is that it can be, have more health benefits than flax oil and a pretty high cooking temperature around 475 Fahrenheit. And spring camelina is a very established oilseed crop in Europe, but now a winter camelina that can be dual cropped with soybeans and provide continuous living cover is what's being worked on right now. And Kernza is certainly the tip of the spear and is sort of leading the charge, but it's very exciting to see this whole collective group of other crops that are in development at various stages.
Farmer interested in Kernza, what would the seed cost be for a producer on a per acre basis?
Let's see. The seed is planted at a similar rate to something like alfalfa, so somewhere between 8 and 12 pounds an acre, depending on your row spacing. And the seed cost this year average was about $6 for pure live seed. So.
Any other potential end users outside of the food world that have been identified yet?
I mean, I guess one other thing I think is really important to mention is that a big benefit to farmers and a compelling part of the Kernza story is that it is a dual crop. You're getting a grain crop and a forage crop. And so farmers are grazing Kernza or cutting a forage crop off of it, which leads the opportunity to Kernza branded beef sticks or beef products or other animal products that can tell another part of the Kernza story.
I know that I should mention after the question on our additional cover crops, some of our future Fields of Innovation programs are going to cover some of those other crops. So we're well aware of them and working on them as well. So make sure you sign up for our future Fields of Innovation events, and you'll be able to see more on those cover crops as well, and alternative crops. Have you looked at Kernza as a bridge crop for growers who are trying to transition to organic farming?
Yes, absolutely. It's a really great crop for those transition years. Because it needs few inputs, and it does really well actually if you plant it into a field with a really low weed seed bed. So if you have a lot of weed seeds in some systems, it can be really hard to get it established that first year, and the yields can be low. But if you plant it into something that's pretty clean, which a lot of conventional fields are, and then use those 3 years as a transition to organic, it tends to be really good at helping control the weeds in those transitional systems.
I would also add that, to the best of my knowledge, no chemicals are currently legally allowed to be placed on Kernza. And so we're at a point where there is certified organic Kernza. There's more non-certified organic Kernza that is being grown organically, basically. And for us as a processor, we currently aren't certified organic, and it's on our to-do list, and something that will certainly be moving forward to serve as a market for both of those, and are excited about being able to work with folks who are transitioning.
What kind of yields are we seeing right now for producers?
I think the numbers are still coming in from this year, but last year at the farm gate, it was right around 500 pounds an acre. This year, it looks like it'll probably be even a little higher. I think as we understand the management and harvest techniques, the yield has increased, and of course the breeders are working on it, but even just understanding the management has helped bring those yields up.
Christopher, we'll start with you. Final comments today from you and your organization on Kernza and Fields of Innovation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Kernza is a wildly exciting thing right now. It's still small. It's still in its infancy, and it's being intentionally grown and expanded out into the world. But I think that we feel really lucky to be here in Minnesota, where there are so many different great brains who are working on really trying to bring this into the world, and that it feels meaningful to be able to engage in this work that has sort of so much opportunity. You know, when you think in decades, you can see Kernza's yield going up by 100% over the coming decade, and it's starting to have its price come down in the marketplace and be more accessible to a wider group of people. And then you can see this bridge into perennial wheat and really the opportunity to rethink agriculture globally and really turn it into this powerful force for fighting climate change and for increasing profits for farmers. And we're just really excited to find ourselves sort of right in the middle of the supply chain, trying to bridge the gap and turn this into a tasty, climate positive, accessible food. So yeah, I think that it's an exciting time, and we'd love to, you know, have folks join us. You can, I think I saw our website in the chat at some point, perennialpantry.com. We'd love to chat if you want to reach out.
And while you were doing your summary, we did have a question on what time of the year is best to plant Kernza.
Most Kernza is planted in the fall. It needs a cold season in order to trigger flowering. It has to vernalize. So most folks are planting in the fall.
Christopher, thank you. Tessa, final thoughts from you on
Christopher did a great job. I think at the Land Institute, you know, we're really committed to this idea of preserving soil and of building a sustainable, perennial, diverse future that takes into account everything along the supply chain, from the socioeconomic through to the crop stewardship. And so we're really excited to work on Kernza and to build these kinds of partnerships and to provide hopefully some leadership and thinking about how we can do this in a system that doesn't have to look like every other new crop, and really try to be as innovative about the supply chain as we are about all of the other pieces of this development of a new kind of agriculture.
Well, Christopher Abbott and Tessa Peters, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks AURI so much for all of the work and for inviting us.
You're welcome. That concludes AURI Connects Fields of Innovation for today, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. Now, in November, we will feature a discussion on what is being done in Minnesota to test and develop new market-based models to provide financial incentives to farmers that implement practices that improve soil health, store carbon in soils, and reduce nutrient runoffs from their fields. Efforts are underway to develop a 50,000-acre pilot project in the Sauk River watershed in central Minnesota. And our November event will include some of the leaders in that project. That's coming up November 20th from noon till 1:15. And you can register right now at auri.org/fields-of-innovation. We're interested in your feedback on our webinar as well, so we ask that you please respond when we send you event evaluations. And we want to thank you for participating today. And remember, for more information on today's topic or any of the work that AURI is involved with, you can go to auri.org or join the Fields of Innovation Facebook group. And join us November 20th for another AURI Connects Fields of Innovation.